In the heart of a dense forest that stretched for miles of uncharted territory, a group of seasoned adventurers was preparing for what promised to be the greatest expedition of their lives. There were 5 of them: Emma, a determined archaeologist; Jack, a trail guide with encyclopedic knowledge of maps and routes; Sarah, a botanist fascinated by exotic flora; Tom, a photographer passionate about capturing the wild's beauty; and Mark, a veteran mountaineer with unparalleled survival skills in the most adverse conditions. Each of them carried a wealth of experience, dreams, and hopes. But above all, the group shared the same motivation: to unravel the mysteries hidden deep within the forest that few souls dared to explore. The environment they found themselves in was challenging, but also breathtakingly beautiful. Towering trees, whose canopies seemed to touch the sky, formed a green wall that blocked out the sun and plunged the forest into constant twilight. Crystal-clear streams ran between moss-covered rocks, and the songs of birds echoed like an eternal melody, guiding the steps of those who ventured there. To the adventurers, this place was a mysterious paradise, full of promises but also invisible dangers. At first, everything seemed under control. Jack led the group confidently, consulting his detailed maps and guiding them along trails he swore he knew. Conversations were lively, full of expectation and excitement. But as they ventured deeper into the forest, something began to change. Jack's maps, so reliable in previous expeditions, began to lose their meaning. Trails that should have been there simply vanished. Landmarks like distinctive rocks or marked trees were absent, as if the forest had changed its shape on purpose, playing tricks on the travelers' minds. The group, once so cohesive, began to feel the weight of fear. What had once been jokes and laughter turned into nervous whispers and worried glances. Hours turned into days, and their supplies, once abundant, began to dwindle. The forest, which initially seemed so welcoming, now became a green prison, with its darkness and oppressive silence. Emma, who had always been the most optimistic of the group, began to doubt. She looked at the compass in her hand, which spun endlessly, as if being manipulated by unseen forces. Jack, the guide everyone trusted, was exhausted and shaken. His shoulders, once straight and confident, now slumped under the weight of responsibility and guilt for getting them lost. Sarah, Tom, and Mark, who also tried to maintain hope, began to feel despair creeping in. It was during a particularly cold night that true desperation began to set in. The group set up camp in a small clearing, surrounded by trees that seemed to be watching their every move. The fire crackled weakly, barely managing to keep the cold at bay. The food was nearly gone, and the remaining water wouldn't last more than a few days. While everyone tried to rest, Emma got up and wandered a little way from the camp. The silence of the forest was unsettling, and her thoughts were filled with doubts and fears. She looked up at the sky, where the stars were barely visible between the treetops, and felt a crushing loneliness. "How did we end up here?" she thought, as a solitary tear rolled down her cheek. And it was at that moment, when hopelessness seemed to have completely taken over, that Emma saw something that would change everyone's fate. Emerging from the shadows of the forest was a small figure that, at first, seemed like just another curious animal. But as it approached, Emma realized it was a fox. Its eyes shone with an unusual intelligence, and it didn't seem afraid of the humans. On the contrary, it was as if it was there for a reason. The fox looked directly at Emma, and for a brief moment, it seemed like their souls connected. There was something magical about this creature, something Emma couldn't explain. She felt a sudden wave of hope, a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a way out for them. Emma didn't know what the fox wanted, but she knew deep down that she had to follow it. And so, without a second thought, she returned to the camp and woke the others, her voice filled with newfound determination. "We have to follow that fox," she said, with a firmness that surprised everyone. They had nothing left to lose. And with one last look at the dying fire, the group followed Emma, who was following the fox, in the hope that it would lead them out of the darkness that seemed ready to consume them. The forest seemed to come alive as the adventurers followed the fox through the dense undergrowth. The animal moved with an almost supernatural grace, gliding between the trees with controlled speed, as if it knew exactly where it was going. The group, however, was exhausted. Each step felt harder than the last, and the weight of despair began to build in their hearts. But there was something about the fox's presence that kept them moving, a faint but persistent hope that it was leading them to safety. Days blurred into a haze of fatigue and hunger. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous, with hidden ravines and roots that sprang from the ground, threatening to trip the weary travelers. Jack, who had always been the most reliable of the group, began to question his own sanity. He stared at the useless compass, wondering how he had allowed them to get to this point. Guilt gnawed at his mind, and he avoided looking at the others, fearing he would see his own failure reflected in their eyes. Sarah, who had always found peace in nature, was now tormented by uncertainty. Every plant she observed, every flower she encountered along the way, was no longer a marvel to be studied, but a cruel reminder of how lost they were. The fox, on the other hand, continued onward, its steady pace the only anchor for the group struggling against exhaustion and despair. Tom, who carried his camera as an extension of himself, could barely muster the energy to take photos. The landscapes that had once enchanted him now seemed threatening, as if the forest were closing its claws around them. He took pictures reflexively, but each click of the camera felt like a somber beat in his heart. He wondered if he would ever see the outside world again, if his photos would ever be seen by anyone. Mark, the hardened veteran, felt the weight of years on his shoulders like never before. He had always been the pillar of strength in difficult situations, but now, even he felt the cold grip of fear creeping into his bones. He watched the fox with suspicion, wondering if they were being led into a trap. However, every time his eyes met the fox's, he felt a strange confidence, as if the animal knew something they didn't. Emma, who had been the first to see the fox, felt a growing connection with the animal. Something inside her told her that this creature was there to help them, that there was a greater purpose to its appearance. And despite all the despair around her, she clung to this belief with all her might. It was the only thing keeping her on her feet, the only thing driving her forward, even when her muscles screamed for rest. But the forest seemed relentless. More and more, the group found themselves trapped in labyrinths of trees and rocks, as if nature itself was toying with them. On an especially difficult afternoon, they reached a deep ravine with steep walls that seemed insurmountable. The fox stopped at the edge of the precipice, looking at them with an expression that seemed to convey a message. But the group was divided. Jack wanted to find another route, fearing that following the fox would lead them into even greater danger. Mark, on the other hand, believed they had no other choice. They were cornered and directionless. The argument that followed was intense. Exhaustion and hunger made everyone more irritable, and the fear of missing their only chance of survival led to harsh words being exchanged. Emma, usually the voice of reason, was also on the verge of losing control. But it was during this moment of tension that the fox let out a small howl, almost like a call. Everyone stopped and looked at it. The animal began to descend the steep walls of the ravine with agility, indicating that there was a safe way across. Despite their doubts, the group began to follow the fox. It was a risky descent, but they had no other choice. The fox guided them along narrow paths, where a misstep could mean a fall. But miraculously, everyone made it to the bottom of the ravine without any major incidents. When they reached the other side, they were greeted by an unexpected sight, a clearing bathed in sunlight, a momentary respite in the darkness that had surrounded them for days. The relief was palpable. The adventurers collapsed to the ground, exhausted but grateful to be alive. The fox, which seemed to have been sent by some benevolent force, looked at them one last time before disappearing into the forest. But the feeling of relief was short-lived. When they gathered themselves and decided to move on, they realized that the clearing, though beautiful, was only a temporary oasis in the middle of a desert of uncertainties. The true ordeal was yet to come, and the fox, though it had guided them there, could not protect them from the dangers that awaited in the depths of the forest. The group knew they were in uncharted territory, where nature itself seemed to conspire against them. But even so, there was a spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. And it was this hope, kindled by the presence of the fox, that kept them united and moving forward, even as the world around them seemed to crumble. What they didn't know was that the forest still held many secrets, and that the fox had a much bigger role to play in their lives than they could ever imagine. The clearing where the adventurers found brief relief seemed like a sanctuary amidst the forest's hostility. For a few hours, they were able to breathe, eat the last remnants of their provisions, and allow exhaustion to envelop them in a restless sleep. However, the serenity of that place was deceptive. Their rest was abruptly interrupted by the distant sound of thunder, signaling an impending storm. The forest, already a treacherous maze, was about to become even more dangerous. When they awoke, the situation was far from better. The sky, which had once shone above the clearing, was now covered with dark, menacing clouds. The rain began to pour down in torrents, turning the ground into mud and causing streams to overflow. It was as if nature itself was conspiring to make their journey even more difficult. Jack, trying to maintain control, insisted they should continue, but despair began to creep into the group. They were out of supplies, and without a clear path, any direction they chose could lead them deeper into the forest. The tension rose, and a sense of helplessness took hold of everyone. Even the trust they had placed in the fox began to waver. Had they been wrong to follow it? Were they more lost than ever? It was at this critical moment that something unexpected happened. While the adventurers debated their next move, a distinct sound cut through the rain and thunder. It was a familiar sound, evoking memories of safety and warmth, the barking of a dog. But there, in the middle of that forest, it seemed out of place. The group stopped, exchanging glances as they tried to comprehend what they were hearing. The sound was consistent, coming from a specific direction, as if someone or something was trying to get their attention. Emma was the first to react. She began moving in the direction of the sound, guided by an intuition she couldn't explain. The others followed, still hesitant, but with no other options. The path was difficult, the terrain slippery and treacherous, but the barking continued to draw them like a beacon in the darkness. When they finally reached the source of the sound, what they found left them all speechless. There, lying in a small hollow sheltered from the rain, was a large, robust dog with a coat that seemed to shine even in the pale light of the storm. But it wasn't just the dog that caught their attention. Beside it, lying close and protected by the dog's body, was the fox that had led them to this point. It was a surreal sight, as if fate had intertwined their journeys in an unexpected way. The dog looked at the group with vigilant eyes, but there was a calmness in its posture that indicated it was not a threat. On the contrary, it seemed as if it had been waiting for them. Emma slowly approached, the others right behind her, trying to understand what they were seeing. The fox lifted its head and looked directly at Emma, and in that moment, something broke inside her. Emma fell to her knees beside the dog and fox, the tears finally escaping after days of tension and fear. She didn't know why she was crying, but she felt a deep connection with these creatures. The dog gave a gentle bark, as if trying to comfort her, and the fox snuggled closer to her side, its presence offering a strange sense of peace. The rest of the group stood in silence, respecting Emma's moment but also feeling a shift in the air. They didn't know how, but they had the impression that this encounter was more than just a coincidence. The dog, with its protective stance, seemed to have a mission, something that involved both the group and the fox. Tom, always attentive to details, noticed something around the dog's neck. There was a worn collar, but still legible, with a name engraved on it, Hope. It was a simple name, but loaded with meaning, and Tom felt a lump in his throat as he realized it. He shared the discovery with the others, and suddenly, the name Hope seemed to be everything they needed at that moment. Mark, usually the most skeptical of the group, approached the dog and placed his hand on its head, a silent gesture of gratitude. The storm still raged around them, but in that small shelter, they all felt a connection that transcended words. It was as if the universe was giving them a second chance, an opportunity to find a way out, as long as they trusted in the intuition and mysterious guidance the universe had provided. Jack, who until then had been overwhelmed by guilt, found renewed determination. He looked at the dog and the fox, and for the first time in days, felt there was a way forward. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a way out of this forest if they were willing to trust in the unexpected help that had come their way. And so, without further words, the group decided to follow Hope, the dog, who now took on the role of guide, alongside the fox. Together, they formed a new alliance, a connection between humans and animals that transcended mere survival. And as they walked, the storm began to ease, as if the universe itself was clearing the way for them to find the light again. But what lay ahead was something none of them could have predicted. The forest, still full of mysteries and dangers, was about to reveal a truth that would change all their lives forever. And at that moment, even with all the uncertainties, the group remained united, with hope rekindled in their hearts, guided by two animals that somehow seemed to know exactly what they were doing. As the storm slowly dissipated, the adventurers followed Hope, the dog, and the fox through a forest that now seemed less threatening. The presence of the animals brought new energy to the group, a renewed hope that, though fragile, was enough to keep them moving. The path that once seemed endless now began to reveal signs that they were nearing something. The trees, which had once formed an oppressive wall, began to give way to small rays of sunlight that pierced the dense foliage, illuminating the path ahead. The group, once on the brink of collapse, began to feel a change within themselves. Jack, who had carried the guilt of leading everyone into this situation, felt his heart calm for the first time in days. The steady presence of Hope by his side made him believe that, somehow, they were on the right track. Sarah, who had always found solace in nature, felt a deep connection with the forest around them, as if it was trying to guide them to safety. Tom, whose camera had captured moments of despair, now found himself taking photos that reflected a new light, a hope he didn't know he still had. Mark, the hardened veteran, began to allow his defenses to lower, feeling a deep gratitude for every step that brought him closer to escaping this nightmare. Emma, however, was the one who felt the impact of the journey the most. She watched Hope and the fox with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. There was something special about these animals, something she couldn't quite put into words. The fox, which seemed so fragile and small, was actually a silent force that had guided them all to this point. Hope, whose name alone was a constant reminder of what they needed, seemed to have been sent by some higher force to protect them. And although Emma knew they were still far from being safe, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led to something greater, something that would change their lives forever. The path ahead began to incline slightly upward, and the group realized they were climbing a hill. With each step, the vegetation around them grew less dense, and the air felt fresher. Finally, after hours of walking, they reached the top of the hill, where an astonishing view awaited them. Before them stretched a vast, verdant valley, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. In the center of the valley was a small village, with stone houses and thatched roofs, surrounded by soft smoke rising from chimneys. It was a sight that seemed straight out of a dream, an oasis of peace in the midst of the vast forest. The group stopped, speechless, absorbing the beauty of what they saw. After days of darkness, fear, and uncertainty, here was the promise of safety and rest. Hope barked joyfully, as if knowing that its mission was complete. The fox, beside Emma, looked at her with eyes full of wisdom before slipping away and disappearing into the trees. Emma felt a pang in her heart as she watched it go, but she knew that somehow that animal would always be with them in spirit. The adventurers began to descend the hill toward the village, their bodies weary but their hearts lighter. When they finally reached the village, they were greeted by villagers who, though surprised by the group's arrival, welcomed them with kindness. Fresh water, hot food, and comfortable beds were offered without hesitation, and for the first time in days, the adventurers could relax, knowing they were safe. In the days that followed, the villagers shared stories about the forest. They spoke of ancient legends about a guardian fox that appeared to guide the lost back home. They also told of dogs that, in times of great need, emerged to protect those in danger, guiding them to safety. Although the stories were old, The adventurers couldn't help but feel that they had become part of one of those legends. Hope and the fox had somehow been sent to them to ensure they survived that journey. Jack, who had carried the weight of guilt throughout the journey, found peace in accepting that there were forces beyond human control. He knew that without Hope and the fox's help, they never would have found their way back. Sarah, who always sought answers through science and logic, began to believe that there was more to the world than could be explained. Tom, who had captured every moment of the journey with his camera, felt that the photos he took now told a story much greater than any image could convey. And Mark, the hardened veteran, discovered that even he, who thought he had seen it all, still had much to learn about the world. Emma, however, was the one who changed the most. She carried within her the memory of that fox as a symbol of resilience and hope. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but that there would always be a way to overcome them, as long as she remained open to the possibilities and unexpected help that might come. The group spent a few days in the village, recovering their strength and preparing for the return to the outside world. When it finally came time to leave, they said goodbye to the villagers with gratitude, knowing that their lives would never be the same. Hope, the dog that had guided them there, stayed in the village, as if knowing that its mission was complete. Emma gave the animal one last hug, feeling a deep connection with it, before stepping away. And as they walked away, she looked back one last time, hoping to see the fox again. But the forest was silent, as if bidding them farewell subtly, allowing them to move on with their lives. The journey back to the civilized world was much easier than the journey to the village. And when they finally emerged from the forest, the group knew they had been through something that few would understand. The story of their journey and the creatures that guided them would become a memory to be shared, but also a reminder that hope and help can come in the most unexpected moments. And so, with hearts full of gratitude and a new perspective on life, the adventurers moved on, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that no matter how dark the path might seem, there would always be a light to guide them back home. When they finally returned to civilization, the adventurers were welcomed as heroes. The news of their incredible journey spread quickly, and soon everyone wanted to hear about the mysterious fox and the brave dog that saved them. However, the group knew that their story was more than just an adventure. It was a testament to the power of hope, faith in the unknown, and the strength of the connection between humans and animals. In the months that followed, each member of the group found a new direction in their lives, transformed by the experience they had endured. Jack, who had always prided himself on his ability to navigate the most difficult paths, now understood that not everything in life could be controlled. He began working as a survival instructor, teaching others not only technical skills but also the importance of trusting instincts and the invisible forces that guide us. Sarah, who had always sought to understand the world through science, began exploring ancient stories and mythologies from various cultures, trying to find connections between what they experienced and the legends she had heard in the village. Her research led to fascinating discoveries about the relationship between humans and animals throughout history, and she published a book that became a bestseller, inspiring others to view the natural world with new eyes. Tom, the group's photographer, organized an exhibition featuring the photos he took during the expedition. The images, capturing moments of despair and triumph, deeply moved those who saw them. The exhibition, titled Light in the Darkness, not only celebrated the beauty of the forest but also the courage and hope that kept the group moving forward. Tom found a new purpose in his art, using his photos to tell stories that inspired and touched people. Mark, the hardened veteran, found inner peace after the journey. He began working with search and rescue organizations, using his skills to help other adventurers who found themselves in difficult situations. For him, the experience in the forest was not just a test of his physical strength, but a lesson in humility and acceptance of the forces beyond our control. Emma, who had always felt a special connection with the fox, dedicated her life to working with animals. She founded a sanctuary for rescued animals, offering a safe haven for those who, like her, needed a second chance. The sanctuary, named Hope's Haven, became a symbol of resilience and renewal, attracting visitors from all over the world who came to hear her story and see the animals living there in peace. The story of the adventurers, the fox, and Hope, the dog, became a legend in its own right. People from far and wide came to the village in hopes of seeing the mystical fox or meeting Hope, now the guardian of the place. Although the fox was never seen again, its spirit continued to live on in the memories of those who believed in the power of the invisible forces that guide us. And so, the story came to an end, but the lessons it left behind remained. The adventurers learned that true strength lies not just in skills or knowledge, but in the ability to believe, even when everything seems lost. They discovered that hope can arise from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes, trusting the unknown is the only way to find our way back home. The forest, with all its mysteries and dangers, became a place of reverence for those who heard the story. It was more than just a piece of wild land. It was a symbol of challenges, yes, but also of overcoming and transformation. The adventurer's journey proved that even in the most desperate circumstances, there is always a light that can guide us, whether it takes the form of a silent fox or a dog named Hope. And so, with hearts transformed and lives renewed, the adventurers moved forward, knowing that whatever the future held, they would always carry with them the lessons of the forest and the memory of those who helped them find their way back to the light.